Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello everyone, DJ here, and this is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. I'm excited to show you a new budget deck tech. This is Yorvo Lord of Garenbrig, and he is big, but the price tag is so low. At the time of recording, this deck comes in at $36. And there's some options in here for making your deck cheaper and more expensive. But let's get into Yorvo. Yorvo is green for a 0/0 legendary creature giant noble. Yorvo, Lord of Garenbrig, enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. Then, if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo's power, put another +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. So this deck, at its focus, is a budget deck. We want to make sure that we are focusing on keeping those card prices down, but the power level up. Speaking of power, we just need tons of green creatures to grow Yorvo's power bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you have a massive commander that can just start smashing into your opponents. You know, to complement this get big strategy, we're going to want some ramp. We're also going to make sure that we're not all in on one creature. So we're going to want some card draw and some other ways of supporting Yorvo. Mana dorks are going to be important in this deck because it revolves around Yorvo. And Yorvo doesn't have built-in protection, so he might die, which means we need to be able to ramp out Yorvo even more. Arbor Elf, Elvish Mystic, and Llanowar Elves are 1-drops that can ramp you into Yorvo on turn 2. Elysian Caryatid and Whisper of the Wilds, they can produce more than 1 mana, especially when you have a big Yorvo on the battlefield. That means they can ramp us into our relevant spells and provide big ramp later on in the game. You know, all of these dorks are fine, but the best type of mana ramp are ones that get lands onto the battlefield. Springbloom Druid and Sakura Tribe Elder are great because they're creatures, but they still put lands on the battlefield. You know, it's hard for your opponents to get rid of lands, and it's easy for these creatures to be swept up in board wipes. Wood Elves would belong in this category if it weren't a little bit too expensive. Wolf Willow Haven, Werebear, and Rishkar Pima Renegade can give us mana in the early game and then turn sideways pretty effectively in the mid to late game. Then we have Llanowar Tribe, Marwyn the Nurturer, and Karametra's Acolyte. These can produce lots of mana, not just 1 or 2, but 3 or 4 or 5. You know, Marwyn only triggers off of elves, and there's not a critical mass of elves in this deck, but usually enough for Marwyn to actually be a pretty powerful mana dork. Ronus's Monument. Yeah, they reduce the casting cost of creature spells by 1, but really? When you cast a creature spell, you're giving something +2/+2 and trample. Trample is going to be a key theme of this deck that we're going to want to think about. Drum Hunter. Yeah, it taps for mana, but most importantly, if you control a creature with power 5 or greater, you may draw a card. We're often going to have big creatures, and Yorvo, it's going to be difficult for it to not be 5 or more power. And then finally, Beanstalk Giant. You can cast this sorcery called Fertile Footsteps that can put a land on the battlefield, and then cast it, well, to be huge. One thing about Beanstalk Giant being huge is that the damage doesn't get through very easily unless you have Trample. Ronus's Monument being relevant, Drum Hunter being relevant, drawing a card off of Beanstalk Giant. The synergy is all there. And by the way, they all work with Yorvo too. Yorvo triggers off of creatures entering the battlefield, so we're going to want to make sure that we have a deck full of creatures. And we're also going to want to make sure we have a deck that synergizes with creatures. Let's take a look at a few of the most expensive cards in this deck. Beast Whisperer is over $1. 2 green for a 2/3 Elf Druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. We have a critical mass of creatures in this deck, and this makes a mana dork that you play in the late game really good because you can draw a card off of it, grow your Yorvo, and it's still a relevant creature. Very strong. Primordial Sage is also over $1, and it's just a big Beast Whisperer. 4 green for a 4/5 whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. Soul of the Harvest is a little bit more budget, 6 mana for a 6/6 trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Let's keep drawing cards. Voice of Many is 2 green for a 3/3, and this deck has so many creatures in it, it's often going to have you drawing 3 cards when it enters the battlefield. That's an amazing enter the battlefield effect. Drum Hunter is my second mention because there's some card advantage on that Drum Hunter. Let's skip past to something pretty similar, Colossal Majesty. 2 and a green for an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If you control a creature power 4 or greater, draw a card. I love drawing lots of cards in green decks because a lot of times you need to commit a lot to the board. You know, I need to be playing my creatures to ramp into bigger creatures, and board wipes can really set me back. But if I keep replenishing the cards in my hand, I can keep that momentum going and keep the pressure up against my opponents. Fungal Sprouting. 3 and a green for a sorcery, put X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens onto the battlefield where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Oh, we're gonna have Yorvo! Yorvo's gonna be huge, and then we're gonna create even more sapperlings. Like, let's say Yorvo's a 10/10. Easy. You create 10 sapperlings, and suddenly Yorvo is a 20/20. You have a board state that's crazy at that point in time. Howl of the Night Pack, 7 mana, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield for each force you control. One thing that's great about having a budget mana base is being able to lean into some of these effects. I love having lots and lots of forests. They're hard to interact with, they're reliable, they enter the battlefield untapped, and they make me wolves. Wolfbriar Elemental, another wolf generator. 2 green for a 4/4 with multi-kicker green. Whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token for each time it was kicked. So the return on mana on Wolfbriar Elemental is great. So this is one of those things that we could be ramping into, and there is no top end. You play this for 10, and then suddenly you have a 4 mana 4/4, and then you get 6 2/2s. And now you've grown your Yorvo by 7. It is a massive board increase with just a single card. Oh, so good. But there are tons of efficient ways of getting creatures onto the battlefield. One thing that is a little bit interesting is that the Beast Whisperer and Primordial Sage, they want you to cast your creatures. Yorvo just cares if creatures enter the battlefield. So things like Squirrel Nest, putting a squirrel token, might not draw you a card from your Beast Whisperer, but it will trigger Yorvo, making him even bigger. Same thing goes with Arasta of the Endless Web. This legendary spider will pop out other spiders all over the place. You might think your opponents might play around this card. No, they won't. They won't care about 1/2 spiders. They're just going to play their spells, and you're just going to end up with an army of 1/2s that can block really well, that you can weaponize later, and that grow your Yorvo ever bigger. And then finally we have Verdant Force. Creating a token every single turn in multiplayer means that you'll have an army out of nowhere. You know, there are some great mana sinks in this deck, but I think that the best one has to be Ant Queen. 3 green for a 5/5. A 5 mana 5/5, and this activated ability is insane. 1 and a green, make a 1/1 insect creature token. It doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me, being able to sink 10 mana to make 5 1/1s and then do it again and again and again means that this one card can change the tone of a game. Rampaging Baloths can also give us some card advantage because every single turn you make those land drops, you get 4/4s. And Spawn Writhe. Spawn Writhe is a particularly sneaky card because it has exponential growth. It's 2 and a green for a 2/2 trample. Whenever Spawn Writhe deals combat damage to a player, put a token that's a copy of Spawn Writhe onto the battlefield. And by the way, that Spawn Writhe token will also create another Spawn Writhe token. And then those 4 Spawn Writhe tokens will create 8 Spawn Writhe tokens. And all of them will grow your Yorvo as you get bigger and bigger. One thing I found is that powerful decks in our formats, they don't play blockers. They really don't. They might have some incidental creatures, but for the most part, they're leaning heavily on powerful spells, and they're ramping heavily in the early game to get to those powerful spells. Punish them. Play a 3-mana 2/2 that will just grow out of control, that will just cascade into taking over the game. I often find someone is open on turn 4 for a Spawn Wraith hit, and on turn 5, and on turn 6. Moving on, let's keep on with the token creation. Hooded Hydra is X green for a 0/0. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and when it dies, put a 1/1 green snake creature token on the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on it. It's got some cool morph stuff. You can place it face down and then flip it up again, and then it'll flip up with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. Hornet Queen provides great value. 7 mana for a 2/2 flyer, but she brings along a swarm of insect tokens with flying and death touch. That's 5 bodies. 4 of those 1/1s buzzing around, death touching in the air. She is amazing. I think only beat in style by Deep Forest Hermit. 5 mana for a 1/1 elf druid that comes with 4 buddies. And these are just little squirrels. Little 1/1 squirrels. But Deep Forest Hermit pumps them up, making them strong, beefy 2/2 squirrels. All of these can put tons of bodies onto the battlefield and make your Yorvo grow huge out of nowhere. Now, the purpose of all of these tokens isn't just to get your Yorvo huge. It's nice that Yorvo gets huge, but really this is just a different angle of attack. Yorvo big, and then army of squirrels and insects wide is actually really strong, especially when you can pump them up with cards like Oran Reef the Vastwood. Make all of your squirrels into 3/3s or 2/2 flyers or 2/2 insects, like really double up their power. Or Heraldric Banner, give yourself that ramp but also that power boost. Or some other cards like Loyal Guardian, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of your creatures. That's pretty good if you've got a really good go-wide strategy. But I really like Overwhelming Stampede because it plays into both strategies so well. You know you're going to have a huge Yorvo on the battlefield easily, and then if your Yorvo can provide power to the rest of your team, you can just trample over. By the way, it adds trample too. Another thing that we need in this deck. And then finally, Endray's Forerunners. It's a small pump in power and toughness, +2/+2, but it grants that important trample, really making your wolf. Just imagine if you make a bunch of wolves and suddenly they're 4/4s with vigilance and trample. You're gonna win that game. You might even just win that game if you can get Yorvo trample with all these creatures you're throwing onto the battlefield. In fact, Yorvo getting big is one of the scariest things that this deck can do. And we can make sure that Yorvo's bigness can be something that just can't be chump blocked. I really like Suruk the Hunt Caller because it can really give Yorvo haste. Get in there. In fact, Suruk can give everything haste. I'm a little bit sad though that Suruk has gone up in price. This used to be one of my, go-to 20-cent budget staples, but now it's hovering around $1 and it makes me a little bit sad. But Suruk is still my boy. One thing about Yorvo is that giving him haste, getting him through is going to be important, but he's vulnerable. He's a vulnerable giant noble. So we need to protect him. One budget form of protection is Wrap in Vigor. This just regenerates all of your creatures. This is kind of the budget heroic intervention because heroic intervention is stupid expensive. Don't buy it. Go buy a Wrap in Vigor. You can also spend a few dollars outside of the budget to give Yorvo its own individual protection with cards like Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots. This deck doesn't include them because, well, honestly, I don't think I need them, and I think I can hate out artifacts really well if I don't lean into that artifact strategy. Let's find other ways to get Yorvo big damage. I'm a huge fan of Fists of Ironwood, a 2-mana aura that can enchant Yorvo, create 2 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. That's going to pump your Oro +2/+2, And it's going to give him trample. This does everything we want. Trample, go wide. The only thing we really need is protection. Some other ways to grant trample is through Goreclaw. This is another card that's kind of poking its head above the budget. Goreclaw is a little bit over $1, but it's like mana ramp. You know, creatures you cast with power 2 or greater, or 4 or greater, cost 2 less to cast. Doesn't hit Yorvo at a 0/0 in the command zone, but that's okay. Goreclaw will make a bunch of different spells cheaper in this deck. But really, it's the ability to give everything +1/+1 and trample when it attacks. It's so good. Aggressive Mammoth gives everything trample. Brawn, if it's in our graveyard and we have a forest, gives everything trample. That universal trample is so good, even though we only really need it on Yorvo. I already mentioned Ronus's Monument, a solid way to ramp out big creatures, but also grant trample. You know, turn those mana dorks into +2/+2 and trample. They become like combat tricks. They're great. And then finally, we could give some trample based on some equipment. There is some budget equipment out there that could definitely work. Ring of Colonia is one of them. I mean, if I wanted to break the budget, I'd put in like a Ronus to pump something up, maybe a Nylea, or maybe even a Shadow Spear. Yeah, that would be some good budget breaking right there. But again, I don't think you need it, especially these artifacts, because I think I want to be preying on my opponent's reliance on artifacts. Too many decks out there are just running mana rocks all over the place. Let's blow them up with one of my favorites, Molder Slug. Molder Slug is 3 green for a 4/6, not a bad rate. But at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact. Nom nom soul rings. Yes, I love Molder Slug coming around. Do you know what's great? Just imagine this scenario. Your opponent is playing an artifact deck. That's already good. But many of them will play those artifact lands. And so I've had a Molder Slug come around and just start om-nomming their Darksteel Citadel. And it just feels so good. Oh, they're like, but it's indestructible. Sacrifice it. If you also want to prey on those and maybe some of your friends' expensive mana bases, wait a second, do you have duels in there? Let's just Wave of Vitriol them away. Wave of Vitriol is 5 green for a sorcery. Each player sacrifices all artifacts, enchantments, and non-basic lands he or she controls. For each land, you get to go find a basic. Do you know how many people don't have enough basics? So many Commander players skimp on the basics. You're not skimping on the basics. You will be able to absorb this hit easily and then bring your opponents crashing down as the tsunami wipes away all of their fancy toys. Let's go on with a little bit more invasion. Bellowing Tangleworm. This card is epic. You should be playing this. This is a card that you should have in your green decks. Throw it in Omnath, throw it in this deck, put it everywhere. Bellowing Tangleworm is 3 green for a 4/4 with Intimidate. Intimidate means this creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and creatures that share a color with it. So Bellowing Tangleworm can't be blocked except by artifacts and green creatures. Okay. Other green creatures you control have Intimidate. What? Suddenly everything is impossible to block? Like, if you're facing down another green token deck, then maybe this does nothing. But in almost every other circumstance, you just gained unblockable. No one's going to be able to deal with all your stuff. You're just going to roll through and take someone out. It's phenomenal. Rogue's Passage, pretty simple. Just give your Yorvo unblockable and smash someone for commander damage. Same thing goes for Key to the City. And also, just throw away some of those cards you don't really want. Speaking of the incremental card advantage of Key to the City, let's talk about some real card advantage. Momentous Fall. Yorvo's gonna be big. Let's sacrifice him to get deeper into our deck. Also, Hunter's Prowess. I know it's a little bit awkward at sorcery speed, but it gives +3/+3 and trample. Yes, trample is so good. And if we can just safely get Yorvo to connect with someone, we will draw so many cards. Oh, love it. And then finally, we have something that breaks the budget, but for a Planeswalker, it is so cheap. Garruk Primal Hunter is 2 green for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. We're just going to look at the minus right here. -3, that'll kill Garruk to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Yorvo's gonna be huge, so Garruk is a 5 mana, draw a ton. I just love that you can play with Planeswalkers now, and Garruk is under $2, so definitely fits that budget role. Return of the Wild Speaker is perfect in this deck. Remember how I talked about going wide with wolves and insects and squirrels, growing your Yorvo huge? Well, Return of the Wild Speaker can end a game in several different ways. For 5 mana, it can either pump up all those non-humans +3/+3, really giving this overrun effect. Or, if you've just got a Yorvo that's big on the battlefield and you need to be able to cash in that Yorvo for more value, well, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. Luckily, most of these are going to be non-creatures, and so I have seen Return of the Wild Speaker be just a great card, and the price tag is so low. I love it. But speaking of something that breaks the budget, unfortunately, Rishkar's expertise is a couple bucks, but I think that you might want to break the bank for it. It really performs in this kind of deck. It's 6 mana, you draw cards equal to power among creatures you control, and for Yorvo that's a lot, and it lets you play a 5-drop. You can even play Return of the Wild Speaker and draw even more cards, and then not know what to do with all those cards because too many cards. Let's keep going big, okay? Wildborn Preserver. In the late game, when you have a lot of mana, make Wildborn Preserver big. You don't need Yorvo to just be able to get in for damage. You could just get in with this Preserver, or have a Thorn Mammoth hit the battlefield and start fighting things and get in for tons of damage, or a Trastodon. You can even blow up your own stuff, so your Trastodon creates your own token army. This is huge. Thorn Mammoth and Trastodon are also kind of forms of removal, and that should be noticed because this deck is removal light. The only other real piece of solid removal is a Kenrith's Transformation. Yeah, so not a lot of removal. You can go after some Beast Withins if you want to. I've put an Uvunvald Tracker here because it's a creature, we like creatures, and Yorvo's huge and he likes fighting, so that seems on flavor as well. Tracker's $1 though, so that might be a little bit sneaky. Now, how does this deck play? It plays fantastic. It is so aggressive. One thing that makes it aggressive is its mana curve. We have over 10 mana dorks and some forms of ramp and acceleration. And so we're going to be able to drop those in the early game and ramp into Yorvo or some of our other big creatures. Once we have Yorvo on the battlefield, we can then start playing those token generators, put a bunch of squirrels out there, and then suddenly Yorvo just needs to be answered. Often, your opponents are going to have an answer for Yorvo because, well, he's too threatening to keep around. That's the best part. But what they've done is they've answered Yorvo, and you still have an army of wolves or squirrels or sapperlings on the battlefield. So you are starting off with a really commanding position. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. I also wanted to thank Cool Stuff Inc. because they sponsor the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. Remember to use Jumbo5 for 5% off your order. And thank you to my patrons. They are spectacular. And if you like more budget stuff, check out my other budget videos here and here. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.